Hello, and welcome to this Beyond Shakespeare exploring session, in which we're exploring Croesus by William Alexander. This is a first look, which means we will read the play with occasional pauses for discussion, and stage directions will be read out loud, although there aren't many, if any. I am your guest host, Liza Graham. Mine is the power. And to read this play, we have assembled a marvelous team of readers. As King Croesus himself, and the role of Harpagus, we have
Lynsey Beauchamp, actor in Kirkcaldy, Scotland.
As Cyrus, King of the Persians, we have
Emily C.A. Snyder here in New York City.
the Big Apple. As Nuntius, the messenger, we have
Rachael, actor on the East Coast.
finest coast, clearly. And as the chorus commenting on the action, we have
This is Tom, gone full Brighton, because I am deaf, dumb and blind kid, and I can only see the text.
But he sure plays a mean pinball.
Oh, yeah.
And so the story so far is that Croesus, whose name, as some of you will know, is a byword for wealth and possessions, he made the mistake of starting the play with a speech about how happy and fortunate he was. You know there's only one way things can go. He met Solon, the Athenian philosopher leader. Solon said that perhaps happiness doesn't consist in worldly possessions, and you should consider being a better and wiser person instead. And Croesus wasn't having any of that. Then we met Adrastus, who problems. He had an ill-fated love affair which resulted in him accidentally killing his brother. In Greece, if you kill a family member, you're cursed. And he was being pursued by the Furies. Meanwhile, Croesus had a very bad dream about his son dying at a spear point. Croesus appointed Adrastus to keep his son safe. Should have probably listened to Solon about being a wiser person. The son, whose name was Attis, also was married to a lady named Celia. So Croesus wanted to keep his son away from war so that he wouldn't die at a spear point. But unfortunately, Attis was permitted to go hunting with Adrastus, whose job it was to keep him safe. Guess what happens? Spear point, Attis. And everyone blames Adrastus, which isn't really fair. Or maybe it is. Anyway, Adrastus sadly kills himself for grief, and Attis's wife, Celia, intimates that she may well do the same. And she has just said that. We are at the bottom of Act 4, Croesus 0, Fates 3, and it's over to the designated hitter, the chorus.
Right. Is that lo all our time, even from our birth?
It absolutely is. In your own time, whenever you wish to begin.
Thank you. Sorry. Lo, all our time, even from our birth, in misery almost exceeds. For where we find the moment's mirth, a month of mourning still succeeds. Besides the evil that nature breeds, whose pains do us each day appall, infirmities which faintly sends the loss of that which fortune lends, and such disasters as oft fall, yet to far worse our states are thrall. While wretched men with men contends, and every one his whole force bends, how to produce another's losses, but this torments to us most of all. The mind of man, which many a fancy tosses, doth forge unto itself 1,000 crosses. Oh, how the soul with all her might doth her celestial forces strain, that so she may attain the light of nature's wonders, which remain hid from our eyes. We strive in vain to seek out things that are unsure. In science, to seem profound, we dive so deep we find no ground. And the more knowledge we procure, the more it doth our minds allure. Of mysteries the depth to sound, of our desires we never bound, which by degrees this draw on still, the memory may not endure. But like the tubs which Danaus' daughters fill, doth drink no oftener than constrain to spill. Yet how comes this? And oh, how can clear knowledge thus, the soul's chief treasurer, but cause of such a cross to man, which should afford him great pleasure? This is because we cannot measure the limits that to it belong, but bent to tempt forbidden things, do soar too high with nature's wings, still weakest whilst we think us strong. The heaven which hold we do not them wrong, to try their grounds, and what that thence springs, this cross upon us justly brings. With knowledge is confused, and grows a grief ere it belong. That which a blessing is when rightly used, doth grow the greatest cross when once abused. Ah, what vails this unto us, who in this vale of woes abide, with endless toil to study thus, to learn a thing that heaven would hide, and trusting to blind a guide, to spy the planets how they move, and to transgress the common bars, the constellation of the stars, and all that is decreed above, whereof as oft the end doth prove a secret sight of our welfare Mars. And in our breast breeds endless wars, whilst what our horoscope foretell, our expectation do disprove. Those apprehended plagues prove such a hell, that then we would unknown them till they fell. This is the pest of great estates, they by 1,000 means diverse, how to foreknow their doubtful fates. And like new giants scale the skies, heaven's secret store house to surprise. With scurrilous skill we see with that what great pain they apprehend it, and how then foolishly they spend it. To learn the thing that once must be, why should we seek our destiny? If it be good, we long attend it. If it be ill, none may amend it. Such knowledge but torments the mind. Let us attend the heavens' decree, for those whom with ambitious art doth blind, may what they seek to fly, and rather find, and lo, of late, what hath our king by his prosperous travels gained? In searching out each threatened thing which at his horoscope contained, for what the heavens had once ordained, that by no means he could prevent, and yet he labours to find out, through all the oracles about, of future things the hid event. This doth his raging mind torment. Now in this age unwisely stout to fight with Sirius, but no doubt the heavens are aggrieved thus to hear told long ere the time their dark intent. Let such of Tantalus the stable behold, who dare the secret of great love unfold.
Act 5, Scene 1. Enter Cyrus and Harpagus.
Let us triumph o'er them, though proud of late, whose glory now doth with their greatness fail. Since with their fortune forfeiting their state, no wars approve, unless that it prevail. The world, that whilst we fought, did doubtful stand, as for the one ordained to be a prey, saw how the heavens placed lightning in my hand, those thundering down who would not us obey. Go, pay our vows, ere enterprising more. The gods detest a mind that is ingrate, and who delight their deities to adore are always bent to stablish their estate. Cause burden altars smoke each sacred place, with bullocks, incense, odors of all kinds. But none can give the gods, still great in grace, a sacrifice more sweet than thankful minds.
Though all who partners are of the earth and air, still whilst tapestured with this azure pale, if for naught else, yet for those gifts least rare, to serve the all-powerful powers should never fail. Yet there are some whom success hath designed, whose names are written in respected scrolls, whom benefits, not ordinary, bind to love them more than life, yea, than their souls. Of those that you are one, your deeds declare, of whom amidst innumerable broils, even from your cradle, they have had a care, and led you safe through many dangerous toils. Though of the troubles of your youth I see, you have not heard the wonderful discourse. I them remember, who did chance to be an actor in your tragic comic course.
The accidents which in our nonage chance, a ripened age not to remembrance brings, like fabulous dreams which darkness doth advance, that are by day disdained as frivolous things. For our conceptions are not then so strong that they can leave impressions long behind. Yet mix, dear friends, old griefs, new joys among, and call afflicted infancy to mind.
Who would not wonder at thy wondrous fate, whom even or born destruction did attend, whilst ere thou couldst offend, pursued by hate, even then to end what now shall never end. Your mother first her father's mind did sting, whilst once he dreamed, which yet his soul confounds, that of a tree from which her womb did spring, the umbrageous branches darkened Asia's bounds. Then to the Magi's straight he gave in charge to try what this strange vision did presage, who having studied their dark art at large, gave this response with a prophetic rage, that once his daughter should a son bring forth, who should, by valor gaining great renown, make vanquished Asia witness of his worth, but from his grandfather first reave the crown. This to Astyages, a terror bred, who vainly bent to scorn the heavens' decree. His daughter out of policy would wed to some weak stranger of no great degree, and to Cambyses, who of her made choice. He for his country then contemned gave ear, whom by your birth the princess did rejoice, and gave her father further cause of fear. Thus tyranny, their brood whose courage fails, doth force the parents in despair to fall, to fight a dastard proud when it prevails, but yet as feared of all, doth still fear all. And tyrants no security can find, for every shadow frights a guilty mind. This monarch then, who could not dream of harms, whose guards did glance all still with steel arrayed, then whilst he lived secure from foreign arms, a babe scarce born and his did make afraid. And whilst Lucina the last help did make, as if some ugly monster had been born, a minotaur, a centaur, or a snake, the people's terror and the mother's scorn, the grandchild's birth, which justly should impart to grandfathers the greatest cause of joys, did, long ere wounded, making him to smart, involve him in a maze of sad annoys, and to prevent what did him fondly fright by giving cause of a deserved hate, he sought by robbing you the new-found light to make your birth and burial of one date. Soon after this he sent for me in haste, whom at that time, and not in vain, he loved, and told the sum of all things that were past, by which his marble mind seemed nothing moved. Yet in the same, as he would let me know, though pity none, some horror did remain, whilst damned in substance to seem clear in show, your blood his heart, but not his hand, should stain. Thus having lulled asleep their judgment still, the wicked would extenuate their crimes, not knowing those who but allow of ill, as actors guilty, differ but in times. With his vile fault he would have burdened me, whom straight he charged an innocent to slay. I promised to perform his rash decree, well weighing whom, not what, I should obey. When I had parted from his highness' face, and carried you, then swaddled with me too, whilst horror did congeal my blood, a space I stood perplexed, not knowing what to do. And as to purge my part, even shedding tears, by troops of passions grief my soul assailed. Thus, when distressed or easing others' fears, the intended death of you, your murderers wailed. For him I sent a servant of mine own, who for the time was herdsman to the king, by whom I made all my commission known, but as enjoined to him showed everything, delivering you with an unwilling breath, whom of pure gold a glistering robe arrayed. I threatened him with many a cruel death, if that your death were any way delayed. Straight then to execute the tyrant's doom, he from my sight did all astonished go, too great a charge for such a simple groom. The show of majesty amazed him so. What man, not wondering, can by deeds behold the providence of all commanding love, whose brazen edicts cannot be controlled? Firm are the statutes of the states above, that mortal whom a deity's favor shields, no worldly force is able to confound. He may securely walk through danger's fields, times and occasions are to serve him bound. For lo, before the herdsman was come home, his wife had chanced a breathless child to bear, who wondered so to see her husband come, while by his conscience crushed he quaked for fear. And straight she curious grew to know the form, how he a babe so beautiful obtained, who her of all did suddenly inform, as to what cruelty he was constrained. She quickly then occasioned to embrace, no doubt inspired by some celestial power, prayed that her infant might supply your place, yet where no beasts his body might devour. So shall we have, saith she, a double gain, since our own child shall get a stately tomb, and we a princely brood, which may remain, still nursed with us as the issue of my womb. The husband liked so well his wife's design, that he performed all what she did require. And when I had directed one of mine, this tragedy's last act, who might inquire, my man who spied a babe there breathless lie, with that rich funeral furniture arrayed, told what the fellow told, a generous lie, so that thus tried I trusted what they said. In end, time, posting with our feathered wings, had given you strength. With others of your years, you haunted games, not nephews under kings. Before that time, admitted for your peers. They fail, call fortune blind, she's sight bewrayed, and your authority by lot enlarged, in pastoral sports who still the sceptre swayed, but as but born for that best discharged, with other children then, as once it chanced, a nobleman of Medea's son remained, who swollen with envy to see you advanced, your childish charge with scornful words disdained, you raging at that proud attempt of his, did punish him as it became a prince. I doubt now, sir, if that you think of this, the rest of rashness did your deed convince.
Though now my breast doth greater thoughts embrace, of youthful sports, yet do not dare spare to speak. Let cares alternately give pleasure place. That which is bended still must sometimes break.
The child's great father did inform the king how that so base a boy his son abused, and of the guard one hasted you to bring, as for an odious crime to be accused. But when the king, expostulating long, by terrors strived to cast your courage down, you boldly said that you had done no wrong, to punish one who had contemned your crown. You so magnanimous, amazed to find, whilst pausing long with an attentive eye, that speech imperious told the king your kind, whose brood but the eagles durst have soared so high. The feigned father to the king was brought, who, feared for torture, telling truth in time, where he reward deserved, the pardon sought, as if the saving you had been a crime. Then, as it seemed, delighted with the rest, the king did cause a sumptuous feast prepare, and me desired as his most special guest, that with my son I would to court repair. When I was come, the king great joy disclosed, and soothed my words, which did his chance applaud, but for another end then I supposed. What fairer cloak than courtesy for fraud? When the absence of the sun did darkness breed, the candle's light inheriting his place, on my son's flesh they caused myself to feed, then did upbraid me with his bloodless face. What anguish, or what rage o'erflowed my soul, a loving father may imagine best. Yet at that time I did my rage control, but laid it high up in a stormy breast.
Some of the wise men then I heard remained, who from their former sentence did recoil, and said no danger was, since I had reigned. Then did dismiss me for my native soil, where when I had my blooming season spent, to weakened wrath your lines did strength afford, informing us that many meads were bent for his great cruelty to leave their lord, and wished, if to their scepter I aspired, that I should move the Persians to rebel, which did succeed even as my soul desired, for they disdained in bondage base to dwell. When my encouraged troops all armed did stand, ere they from strangers could attend relief, I quickly marched, encountering with that band, of which the king had chanced to make you chief.
Lo, how those wretches whom the heavens would rack, to plagues exposed, of judgment are unarmed. The king of me his captain straight did make, and looked for help of him whom he had harmed. Yet was the old wrong so rooted in my heart, my country's thraldom and mine own disgrace, that all the horrors mischief could impart seemed naught to me, so my disdain took place.
On those whom they have wronged, none should rely. Just rancor unrevenged can never die.
This enterprise at first so well did speed, that since your greatness still began to rise, which may by time so brave a story breed as may be precious in all princes' eyes.
Behold, how Croesus with his riches blind durst even encounter with my warlike band, and whilst a prosperous course betrayed his mind, did not suspect what power was in my hand. But he and his confederates have seen how victory doth still my troops attend, and Persia must be once all Asia's queen, on whom for servants princes shall depend. Now Croesus is o'ercome, this town surprised, and Lydia charged with gold doth yield rich spoils. The league unprosperous Egypt hath despised. This is the happy end of all our toils. But one sour unseasons all my sweets. That gallant man, who was my mate in arms, whose praise throughout all the peopled circuits fleets, and with his love each generous courage warms. Then when, the weakened troops, in courage strong, the Egyptian chariots desperately he charged, there, whilst he fought infortunately long, Mars from terrestrial bands his soul enlarged.
No doubt that dame this trouble hardly bears, who only seemed for him to like of life. I heard him, whilst she bathed his breast with tears, oft wished by proof to merit such a wife. When their farewell was sealed, last speeches spent, she kissed the coach that did contain her trust, and with eyes big with pearl gazed where he went, still till her sight was choked with clouds of dust.
And have you then not heard? His death but proved the black beginning of a bloody scene. His wife, Panthea, at the first not moved, seemed as she had some marble image been. The body that had oft her fancies fired, she caused bear out of sight, still dear, though dead. But where the river ran when once retired, she twixt her bosoms round entombed his head. And then from rage she borrowed some relief, for sorrows by degrees a passage seeks, vaporing for sighs which made a cloud of grief. A mighty storm of tears rained down from her cheeks. Then whilst her eyes the wonted object missed, with heavy looks resolving fatal haste, pale, senseless lips she prodigiously kissed, with as great ardor then as in times past. I posted thither, bent to have relieved this lady of a portion of her woes. Heaven bear me witness. I was greatly grieved. Who would, to save one friend, spare hosts of foes? She first a space me passionately eyed, then with those words her lips did slowly move. My husband, lo, hath valorously died, as of your friendship worthy of my love. My coming, but increased grief's starving store. For till that passion of itself expire, all kind of comfort but augments it more, like drops of oil thrown on a mighty fire. A constant countenance though I strive to make, and what her woes diminish might did tell, that comfort which I gave, I could not take, and scarcely could throw forth my last farewell. When I had left her but a little space, she did discharge the eunuchs from her sight, then prayed her nurse to bury one in place, her and her lord, as they deserved of right. Last, looking on his corpse, she drew a sword, and even as if her soul had flown in him, pure snows in crimson dyed, embraced her lord, whilst beauty's blubbered stars were waxing dim, then bent to fall, when her they could not raise, as scorning to survive their prosperous state. In emulation of their lady's praise, the eunuchs did precipitate their fate. O sweet Panthea, rich in rarest parts, I must admire thy ghost, though thou be gone, who mightst have made a monarchy of hearts, yet loathed unlawful laws and loved but one. Oh, wondrous wonders, wonders wondrous rare, a woman constant, such a beauty chaste, a mind so pure joined with a face so fair, with virtue beauty in one person placed. Both were well matched as any could devise, whose death confirms the union of their life. He valorous, she virtuous, both wise. She worthy such a mate, he such a wife. And Harpagus, lest that it should be thought that of brave minds the memory may die, cause build a stately tomb with statues wrought, where both their bodies with respect may lie.
I'll raise a pyramid of Croesus spoils, whereof their worth each part shall be comprised. But how to do in these tumultuous broils? Now time requires that you were well advised. Your adversary doth attend your will. This haughty town for fear to fall doth bow, and therefore pardon, ransom, quite, or kill. Do what you please. None can control us now.
As for old Croesus, I am else resolved. He, with some captives whom I keep in store, shall have their bodies by the fire dissolved, as offerings to the gods whom I adore. My soldiers' pains this city shall defray, since by their means it hath been gained for us. I yield it unto them, as their just prey, who taste the sweetness of their travels thus. Of other things we shall so well dispose that our renown throughout all the world shall shine, till Cyrus' name give terror to all those who dare against his sovereignty repine.
And there we shall pause for discussion, because woo-wee, not a lot happened in that scene, but a lot was related. Lynsey, you gave us the full biopic, maybe enough material for a trilogy on Cyrus here, who seems not to be a king yet. I introduced him as Cyrus, king of the Persians, but he seems to, I don't know, is he a king yet? Anyway, Lynsey, what happened?
I literally have no idea. I was sight reading this, and I was looking for full stops in the punctuation, but I didn't find any. So I thought I better put them in where I think they fit. And I've no idea if it made any sense.
Someone confessed to editing the text and taking out a lot of the full stops, and I wonder who that was. Anyway,
from the point of view of you know, all the clauses and subclauses and sub clauses. Yes, I and as I was reading along, we suddenly got to the bit where he was forced to eat his own son, and I was like, whoa! I was not expecting that to come out of his mouth.
Yes, and he's sounding remarkably calm for someone to whom that happened.
Well, that was probably the way I was reading it. Because I didn't know it was coming. As I say, I was sight reading.
Well, no, it's written. It's written quite calm. You know, it's written. For all this is a tragedy. You know, it's you know, the character doesn't speak like someone in the throes of grief. He speaks like, you know, your conventional nobleman who's on stage with a king whose job is to praise the king.
Yeah.
And wait, so I sort of wasn't clear in the middle whether there was some people tried to have Cyrus killed as a baby. Some people ordered baby Cyrus to be killed.
There was a baby swap.
There was a baby swap where a mother volunteered to kill her own baby?
No, she had well, I read it was a stillborn baby.
Yeah.
Ah.
And when hubby happened to just come home with another baby, as you do, she had the cunning plan of swapping the babies out. So the baby that was already dead, you know, was the sort of swapped out for the baby that was alive and well and healthy. And
okay, that's a lot less disturbing.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's like one less murder than I thought. But then, does Harpagus say that he gave orders for Cyrus to be killed, for the baby to be killed? Were you the one who gave the kill the baby order?
He was given the kill the baby order, and he subcontracted this order out to this person whose wife then happened to give birth to a stillborn baby at the same time. So it was a sort of a soup of the soup of the soup. It all happened amongst the herdsman and his wife. So basically, what's he called? Harpagus gave the command, had been given the command to do it himself, but passed that command on to the herdsman.
Was there a sense that maybe he knew the herdsman wouldn't do it?
No.
Okay.
Not that I got.
But he was in a position to recognize the real Cyrus once he was grown up.
Well, yes, and I got the impression real Cyrus was madly declaring his princely royal lineage by every breath he took and action he made and sentence he uttered.
Well, he can't help it. He's just that royal.
That royal.
And he offended some nobleman by being better at games than him, and then he refused to repent and submit, and they were like, oh, this must be the real prince.
Exactly, yes.
We hold this truth to be self-evident.
Yeah.
And then there was... And then, okay, so
to do with anything, I don't know, but...
Well, we get the biography of who is this person who just walked on stage. You get the job of telling the audience who this person is. And then Cyrus tells this long story about his deceased comrade in arms, whose name we never even know. Emily, great king to be, enlighten us.
Well, yeah, just in the story, and as being said, there apparently is a different play all about just Panthea and what she went through. Yeah, I guess Cyrus had a buddy and he was killed in war. The way it was written, it sounded like it was in the war against the Medes with Croesus, possibly, like right now, like it happened 5 minutes ago. So it was a little bit easier to act than the like, as you know, let me tell you your story. Like, you know, that's just rough. But yeah, that Panthea realized that her husband's dead. She is so sad that she kills herself. All her eunuchs kill themselves too. And I can't stop them, even though I'm like, I feel bad for you.
Poor eunuchs.
Poor eunuchs. Although again, like, I don't know. That seems to be a common recurring theme in literature. You know, one goes, we all go. I'm not saying it's good, but it's a common trope. Actually, though, so some things that I was noticing is it's very cool because Croesus is so anti-God and increasingly anti-God in the earlier acts. Matter of fact, the last thing we hear is him basically being like, I declare war on you gods and I'm going to take over the world. And then to flip it, and you've got, it's a really nice sort of shadow figure foil to Croesus in Cyrus of like, I came from incredibly humble means. I was even, you know, not afforded anything at birth. Everything was sort of against me except my, of course, inherent nobility. And still I prevail, and I'm going to prevail here too. And I'm also, everywhere I go, I'm just going to like praise the gods more, which seems to be a rather heavy-handed moral from our playwright in there. But a couple playwriting things that I just wanted to like touch base on.
Yeah.
It bothered me that I don't think we say Cyrus's name until like the end of the entire scene. And so you tell this whole story with the hope that everyone has read their histories and like we'll pick up who we're talking about, but like guy walks on, not introduced. You can do that in a closet drama, right? Because you've got the slug of the name, but if it's performed, at some point someone needs to be like, Cyrus, hello, what's going on? Someone needs to just say the name, or maybe wear a name tag. Hello, my name is Cyrus, I'm here to conquer you. But it's a problem. And then And then the long speech, it was fascinating to have, two speeches of let us tell you stories rather than let us battle Croesus, which is sort of what you might expect actually in an Act 5 play, is a bunch of battling, right? Instead, I feel like our good old Sir William here, there's this thing in fantasy writing and history writing called I did my homework, now you have to suffer too. And that's kind of what this act felt like a guy who had really done a deep dive and was nerding out about it and didn't think, how shall I dramatize this? Just thought, I'm going to write it out, and now it's dramatic. It's done because I did it. I did my homework, you have to suffer too. And unfortunately, he did it in the, as you know, having been there. But at the same time, the speech that you had, Lynsey, it is really interesting. It's a really interesting story in an old fairy tale trope that we see in Oedipus. It was reminding me very much of King Arthur stuff. Yeah, a whole bunch of things. So it's a weird scene. That's the upshot.
It's a weird scene, and the fact that it's Act 5 and these two new characters come on. So what this has,
The playwright's been doing that through this entire piece, though. Like, just people will show up, you've never seen them before, and then it's... Okay. I'm sorry, Lynsey, I cut you off.
And also, Rachel's got a hand up, I see.
Yeah, I think that, in a modern production, I think him not saying that he's Cyrus might be a bigger thing than it would have then. Maybe some tropes in the chain, because we do have that play, The Wars of Cyrus, and we have that whole genre of Turkish plays, that splendor, there might be a change in the outfits and the clothes, and people might understand that, or give a little more space for that. And then I think we come to these guys, we had that last scene where, not that last scene, but yesterday we had they were fighting in public, the father and son in court, and it got more and more personal as it went on. And that's that public moving, that's that private moving into the public space, and that's that leak over from the royal people as people, and then the royal people as the government. Cyrus, in the Wars of Cyrus, he's like the best king that we've had come across in plays. He's so righteous, in the things that he does. And so I think he comes on not just to show us how far this tragedy has spread and how bad it's gotten in this foreign country, which was once, where we were stationed in the play. So we have some, skin in it, not just to show how bad it's gotten, but also to give us a foil, another king as a foil, this absolutely terrible king who's not really ruling by any sort of sense or even his superstitions. He goes off his dreams, but seems to rail against the gods. So he's contradictory in his religion. And then it's just, I don't know, I think it gives us a nice, maybe it doesn't work necessarily as drama, I'm not sure, but I think it gives us a nice poetic foil, these two kings.
Yeah, it does. And one nice contrast is the humble origins of Cyrus, who was raised a shepherd, and versus the wealth and privilege of Croesus, with which he's done. He could have done great things, but has done mostly terrible things. Yes, as you say, very, very Piers Plowman. We do love a bit of medieval morality. This being a neoclassical play, we don't have a battle on stage. We don't see, I guess, the Cyrus versus Croesus conflict, but we are told it. We are told it by a messenger. And in the upcoming scene, Act 5, Scene 2, we have the messenger, Nuntius, entering to talk to the chorus. I forget, have we established who the chorus are? Are we Persian maidens? Are we soldiers? Who are we?
They seem to be moralists.
Philosophers. Chorus of philosophers.
Commentators.
Tom, clearly you're typecast here. And by the way, that chorus top of it was very nice, very poetic, yes. I like the... so now the chorus gets to be a character and gets to hear what happened. Enter Nuntius and chorus.
To what part shall I my steps address, of bondage base the burden to eschew? Lo, desolation, ruin, and distress with horror do my native home pursue. And now poor country, take my last farewell. Farewell, all joy, all comfort, all delight.
What heavy tidings hast thou now to tell? Who tears thy garment thus? What forced thy flight?
I tell the wrack of us, and all who live within the circuit of this wretched soil.
Ah, hideous shout we heard the city give. Have foes prevailed? Do they her beauty spoil?
They may it spoil.
And is our sovereign slain?
No, but scarce escaped doth live in danger still.
Then let our minds no more in doubt remain, and must we yield to that proud stranger's will.
You know how Croesus at advantage lay, still seeking means to curb the Persians' pride, and how the Assyrians had assigned a day, when, led by him, they battle would abide. But Cyrus, having heard how that they would against his state so great an army bring, straight raised forces, providently bold, prevents, invades, o'ercomes, and takes our king.
This shows a captain both expert and brave, whose wisely doth advise, perform with speed, no circumstance, friend, unrelated leave, which with our king did our confusion breed.
When Croesus saw that Cyrus came so soon, he stood a while with a distracted mind, yet what time would permit left naught undone, but made his musters, marched his foe to find, our stately troops that for rich arms excelled, and with umbrageous feathers fanned the air, with insolency, not with courage swelled, a triumph dreamed, scarce how to fight took care. The Lydian horsemen never stained, but true, and for their worth, through all the world renowned, them chiefly Cyrus labored to subdue, and this device for that effect was found. Untrussing all their baggage by the way, each of the camels for his charge did bear a grim-faced groom, who did himself array with what in Persia horsemen used to wear. To them the infantry did follow next, a solid squadron like a brazen wall. But those in whom all confidence was fixed, the brave cavalry came last of all. Then Cyrus by the reins his courser took, and bravely mounted, holding out his hands with an assured and imperious look, when kindling the flaming bands, he them desired, who at death's game would strive, to spare none of their foes in any form, but as for Croesus, to take him alive, and keep him captive for a greater storm. Where famous Hellas doth to Hermas post, to give another both his strength and name, our army ran against a greater host, to grace it likewise with our force and fame. Each troop a time with equal valor stood, till giving place at length we took the chase, well at the river ran to hide our blood, but still his borders blushed at our disgrace. For when the camels to the field were come, our horses all affrighted at their sight, ran raging back again, and of them some, disordering ranks, put many to the flight. Yet some who had been used with martial trains, the stratagem, though out of time, perceived, and lighting down red heights raised from green plains, did vengeance urge of those whom they them deceived. There, whilst the world proved prodigal of breath, the headless trunks lay prostrated in heaps. This field of funerals sacred unto death did paint out horror in most hideous shapes, whilst men unhorsed, horses unmastered, straight, some called on those whom they most dearly loved, some raged, some groaned, some sighed, roared, promised, prayed, as blows, falls, faintness, pain, hope, anguish moved, those who then scaped like beasts unto a den. A fortress took where valor none renowns, walls are for women, and the fields for men. No town can keep a man, but men keep towns. And we were scarcely entered at the ports, when straight the enemies did the town enclose, and quickly reared huge artificial forts, which did to the besieged more pain impose. All martial engines were for battery found, at like encounters which had erst prevailed, whilst both they used the advantage of the ground, and borrowed help from art where nature failed. They always compassing our trench about, still where the walls were weak, did make a breach, which straight repairing, darts were hurled out, to kill all those who came where we might reach. There all the bolts of death, edged by disdain, which many curious wits inclined to ill, whilst kindled by revenge or hope of gain, had skill to make, were put in practice still. Yet as we see it oft times hath occurred, where least we did suspect, we were surprised, whilst fortune and the fates in one concurred, that in fame's rolls our fall might be comprised. That side of Sardis, far from all regard, which doth next Tmolus lie, thought most secure, through this presumption, whilst without a guard, all Lydia's o'erthrown did with speed procure, as one of ours unhappily it chanced, to reach his helmet that had scaped his hand, alongst that steeple part his steps advanced, and was returning back unto his bond. He was well marked by one who had not spared to tempt all dangers which might make us thralls. For Cyrus had proclaimed a great reward to him whose steps first trod the conquered walls. And this companion, seeing without stay one in his sight that craggy passage climb, straight on his footsteps followed all the way, and many a thousand hasted after him. Then all that durst resist were quickly killed. The rest who fled nowhere secure could be, for every street was with confusion filled. There was no corner from which some mischief free. Oh, what a piteous clamor did arise of ravished virgins and of widowed wives, who pierced the heavens with lamentable cries, and having lost all comfort, loathed their lives, whilst those proud victors would themselves have stained with all the wrongs that pride or power could use. They by a charge from Cyrus were restrained, and durst no more their captives thus abuse.
No doubt, but high mishaps did then abound, whilst with disdain the conqueror's bosom boiled, as some the sword disgraced did some confound. Not only horse, houses, temples too were spoiled. What misery more great can be devised? Then is a city when by force surprised. But whilst that stately town was thus distressed, what did become of our unhappy king?
Then, when the enemy had his state possessed, and that confusion seized on everything, he scarcely first could trust his troubled sight. The fortune past transported had him so. Yet having eyes, who can deny the light? He saw himself inferior to his foe, and apprehending there whilst left alone, how that his judgment long had been betrayed, as metamorphosed in a marble stone, his ravished thoughts in admiration strayed, but such a weight of woes not used to bear. He first was grieved, then raged, and last despaired, till through excessive fear, quite freed from fear, he for his safety then no further cared. And never wished he so to have long life, but death far further was affected now. Still seeking danger in the bounds of strife, so he were sure to die, he cared not how. Whilst furies thus were fostered in his breast, him suddenly a soldier chanced to meet, as insolent as any of the rest, who, drunk with blood, ran raging through the street, and wanting but an object to his ire, he sought to him, and he to him again. I know not which of them did most desire, the one to slay, the other to be slain. But whilst so base a hand, towering aloft, did to so great a monarch threaten death, his eldest son, who, as you have heard oft, was barred from making benefit of breath. I cannot tell you well, nor in what form, if that the destinies had so ordained, or if of passions an impetuous storm did raise the strings that had his tongue restrained. But when he saw his sire in danger stand, he with those words a mighty shout did give. Thou furious stranger, stay, hold thy hand. Kill not King Croesus, let my father live. The other hearing this, his hand retired, and called his king's commandment to mind. High were those aims to which his thoughts aspired, whom for great fortunes this rare chance designed. Now when that Croesus who for death long longed was quite undone by being thus preserved, as both by life and death, then doubly wronged, whilst but by fates for further harm reserved, he with sad sighs those accents did accord. Now let the heavens do all the ill they can, which would not unto me the grace afford, that I might perish like a private man. Ah, must I live to sigh that I was born, charactering shame in a dejected face? Must I live to my perpetual scorn, the abject object pointed for disgrace? Yet this unto his soul more sorrow bred. He, scorn pretending state, as king arrayed, was with great shouts ridiculously led back to the tent, whereas their emperor stayed. Then that he might his misery conceive, their robes so rich were all exchanged with chains, and prince's strictness bragged him with the grave. And prison's strictness bragged him with the grave. So soon as death could make a choice of pains, they caused in haste a pile of wood to make, and in the midst where all men might him spy, caused bind the captive king unto a stake, with 14 others of the Lydians by. There, as if offerings fit to purge the state, foes sought with flames their ruin to procure. Though love preposterous piety doth hate, no sacrifice is sweet, which is not pure. Now whilst the fire was kindling round about, as to some powerful god who prayed or vowed, with eyes bent up and with his hand stretched out. O Solon, Solon, Croesus cried aloud. Some hearing him to utter such a voice, who said that Cyrus curious was to know, when dying now, what deity was his choice, did him request his last intent to show. His exclamation was, said he, on one, with whom he wished their frailty so to see, that all who ever trusted in a throne had but conferred a space as well as he. Then there he told what Solon had him shown, whilst at his court, which flourished then, arrived, how worldly bliss might quickly be o'erthrown, and not accomplished was, while as one lived. Whilst forth salt floods attending troops did pour, he show how much the wise man did disdain those who presumed of wealth or worldly power, by which none could a perfect bliss obtain. This speech did Cyrus move to ponder much, the great uncertainty of worldly things, as thinking that himself might once be such, since thralled to fortune's throne like other kings, then such a pattern standing before him, whom envy once, then pity did attend, he to our king did liberty restore, and with his life did Solon's fame extend. Yet him the fire still threatened to devour, which, rising high, could hardly be controlled. But, O devotion, then appeared thy power, which to subdue the heavens makes worldlings bold. To quench the flames, whilst divers toiled in vain, Jove moved by prayer, as Croesus did require, the azure cisterns opened did remain, and clouds fell down in floods to quench the fire. Then whilst the soldiers did the city sack, to save the same as to his country kind, the hopeless Croesus thus to Cyrus spake, with words which pity melted from his mind. Great prince, to whom all nations now succumb, and do thy yoke so willingly embrace, that it some comfort gives to be o'ercome by one whose glory graces our disgrace. Since now I am constrained your thrall to be, I must conform myself unto my fate, and cannot hold my peace, whereas I see that which may wrong the greatness of your state. Your state is spoiled by not suspect powers. If this rich city thus do rest o'erthrown, which now no more is mine, but is made yours, and therefore, sir, have pity of your own. Yea, though the loss of such a populous town, both rich and yours, your mind could nothing move, yet think of this, which may impart your crown, a piece of policy which time will prove. The haughty Persians, both with stubborn minds, who but for poverty first followed you, their matchless worth in arms large Asia finds. Their fear is fallen upon all nations now. But if you suffer them in such a sort to be made rich with plenteous Lydia's spoils, not able then their conquest to support, the vanquished by their fall the victor foils. Let not vain pleasures entertain their sights. Rest wealth, pride, war ruin breeds. Whilst faint though pleasures, weakened with delights, no thought of honor from base breasts proceeds. Then Cyrus straight approving what he spake, his soldiers were from fresh spoils restrained, whilst he the 10th part did pretend to take, a fatal offering for the gods ordained. This is the sum of our disastrous state. We must a stranger serve, as thralled long since. With loss of all which he possessed of late, our king bought breath, a poor thing for a prince.
O wretched people, O unhappy king! Our joys are spoiled, his happiness expired, and no new chance can any comfort bring, where destinies to ruin have conspired. Go, woeful messenger, hold on thy course, for to have heard too much it irks our ears, and we shall note of this thy sad discourse, which sighs each accent and each point with tears.
Yes, we'll take a discussion break here. So we have been told the entire course of the battle, in which we gather Croesus has lost badly. Rachael, what just happened?
Oh my God, everything happened. The country switched hands. I don't know, Croesus gave something up. He swayed Cyrus. I think this is a wonderful thing that you get in this messenger speech, is that Croesus had so many advisors and he didn't take anything from any of them. He didn't take anything from Adrastus. He didn't take anything from Solon. But from an enemy king, Cyrus listens immediately to his counsel, because he judges him a wise man for having the experience of lost a country, and Cyrus might one day lose a country, and so he should take the advice of somebody who has lost a country so that he does not lose a country, and he makes sure that the city is not sacked but treated kindly. So the government is not preserved, but the people, like the government of the country is not preserved, but the physical country is preserved in this begging for life or whatever. And then the son that Croesus hated actually saved him. That never gets mentioned the name of. Saved his life or something. His
nonverbal son who never spoke. And Croesus, in Act 1, Croesus described that son as dead to me. Because apparently the son not being able to verbalize his affection offended Croesus. And yet, the son miraculously speaks and says, "Please don't kill my dad." And Cyrus listens, which Croesus never would have. The bit about having the dromedaries Cyrus having the dromedaries in front to frighten the horses of Croesus' cavalry is apparently in Herodotus. So there we go. This Scottish dude read his Herodotus. So, yeah, there's a lot of. The messenger recounts a lot of changes of fate, and there's the battle story, and then there's the Croesus story, I guess. And what's the chorus's role in this, Tom? What do you feel like you're a character, or what's your position?
Well, I'm sort of like not the conscience, but the prompt. I seem to give the moral background, as you say, and prompt the story, move the story along by asking such questions.
Yeah.
But, yeah, forgive me. This is the first time I've come upon the text, and we're sort of like an hour in, and I'm still rocking and reeling. So,
well, I think you have that in common with most of us. This text is proving to be a far wilder ride than I had predicted. And again, being neoclassical, it's very tell, don't show. So the chorus in some ways seems to be in the same role as the audience, in that your job is to react and to comment. I don't know, do you to react, to comment, do choruses have other roles, maybe exposition sometimes? But
yeah, I mean, the chorus has always played its part, forgive me, in that sense. And yeah, it's the mediator. It's sort of like, as you say, the audience tell us what has happened, and by the way, what happened to the king, and oh no, that didn't, But not being here for the beginning of the play, I don't know most of the story. I'm just reading straight.
Emily, what of the night?
Oh, well, actually, something that we've mentioned in the chat, and Rachel, you may be able to speak more to this since you've been here for all three, but it was mentioned this sort of feels a little bit more like 3 plays or 3 acts, where the first 2 are the setup, with Solon, with his family, with his riches, and then you've got this lovely action centerpiece in acts 3 and 4, and then this last act, it feels extremely different, and it's interesting because the verse that's used between each act feels very different as well. It feels like, at least to me, like different, that they were written in different stages rather sort of written as a whole, perhaps. So which is to say, Tom, in some ways you're kind of doing the third play rather than having missed the first 4 acts. You've kind of done a complete act in itself, but it's the storytelling act. It's the let us fill you in on what happened act. Yeah.
Yes, and the events being related are, I guess, proportionally dramatic. Although the death of Attis was pretty dramatic, wasn't it?
It was, and the difference is that it was in first person in some ways. Well, I think that whole act was actually fairly well done, because I think both stories, that Cyrus and sort of his, savior who he was talking to, played by Lynsey, both had sort of I, as opposed to I'm going to comment on, there's a further remove, I'm relaying the information. So for example, in Rachel's chorus piece, I found again that I was dropping in towards that very end where suddenly the chorus as messenger, and I don't know if you felt this, Rachel, was like, and this is how I'm going to react now that my place has been taken over. But yeah, it makes a difference if it's personalized, I think.
Yeah, I mean, certainly if I were directing this, if I were directing any play featuring a Greek-style chorus, I would, you know, tell the chorus to be an I rather than a we, to make it personal, to react to have a personal emotional reaction or opinion about what's being said. I thought of another thing choruses do, although they haven't done it so much in this play, that they react, they comment, they do exposition. They also sometimes advise. Or, when people are having an extreme emotional moment, they sometimes say, perhaps you should not give way to this unruly grief. But the chorus in this one seems to mostly comment when the other characters are off stage. I wasn't here I was here for the first session, not the second. But I do like the chorus being in dialogue here, at least to some extent. Mostly they're here so Nuntius has someone to talk to. Since everyone else alive already knows what happened. And now, Rachael.
Oh no, I was just gonna say also so many of the people who could speak to Nuntius, there's really no one left for him to report to. So they've all been taken out in some form or another.
They have. The chorus may be the last people or person standing. Lynsey, then Emily.
Yeah, no, I was just before we move on, I was just going to check. So do we think that Nuntius has left the stage, chorus remains on stage, and Croesus comes on to the chorus? Is that what we think this is?
The chorus does seem to have told Nuntius, rather than saying, thank you for telling us what happened, or have a cup of tea, they say, go, woeful messenger. They just order poor Nuntius off stage. Nuntius had kind of a bad day and it's not getting any better. To have heard too much, it irks our ears. Yeah, how many times have any of us heard that? And we can then assume that there's some kind of tableau as Croesus is brought on as a prisoner. And Emily, what was...
Oh, no, just to say, again, as we've seen earlier in the play, there is no indication in stage direction as to who is present when. So as Croesus is about to come on again, and this was something that I noticed in the last session in Acts 3 and 4, is that it would be entirely possible, and it continues to be entirely possible since Croesus is about to speak, that Croesus is like there for so many of the retellings of his failures. Which would be, I think, personally an interesting staging device if Croesus is sort of in this purgatory. But it leaves it open because there is no stage direction. People just appear and disappear. And that continues on here. So that opens it up for what directors would want to do. As Rachael was mentioning, what's public, what's private, what's heard, what's unheard, things like that.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, one assumes, I mean, I'm sort of mentally I'm seeing Croesus brought in on a wagon or something, a bit like Andromache in the Trojan Women. But when do you, if you're directing this, when do you bring Croesus on? Do you bring him on to witness the tale of his downfall? Do you sort of have him there chained to whatever he's chained to? Rachael?
Yeah, I wonder if he comes on. I mean, this is a potential spot where he could, for a production, come on. Towards the end of Nuntius's last speech, we must a stranger serve, because there is that royal we. I mean, it's not, Nuntius isn't using it in that way, but linguistically, there is that royal we. Or at chorus where he says, "Oh, wretched people, oh, unhappy king." He actually sees the king. That would be a interesting, I think, emotional beat to bring in, just because we have had this large, story that's been told, to give some more reaction and stuff like that. And also how I don't know, maybe this is just another scene foil, but because of Turkish plays and Cyrus coming on with probably in grandeur, that Croesus now to be like, to come in not in whatever he was wearing before, or in chains or on a wagon or something, would be such a contrast.
Yeah, Emily.
I love what you were saying, Rachel, about like which line would sort of, spark things most. And was just reminded that the line that I think is both sort of a little bit like, okay, come on, playwright, you're very clever, but at the same time, like, you are clever. The line, let's see, let not vain pleasures entertain their sights, and then rest wealth, wealth pride, pride war, war ruin breeds. To me, sort of sums up the play. And because you don't want to rush through that line, because you keep repeating words with just commas in between. So you could possibly, if you've got like the coming in on a wagon and a trundle and you could really kind of let that line almost be to like drums or something, and letting people really hear. This was the whole point of the play.
Yes, and as you say, the pacing of that line sort of slows itself down because it's so spondaic. There's barely an unstressed syllable apart from maybe the second of ruin. So a friend of mine always says, when the text gets monosyllabic, it's because the author wants you to slow down. And that's sometimes true, but sometimes less. Emily.
If it's a good author, because people tend to use spondies because they're counting to 10, and they don't realize they're just writing spondies because they're using no multisyllabic words because they're worried about syllable count. That's a whole other thing, but which is to say, playwrights, please use multiple syllabic words because spondies don't always help you.
Yeah, I mean, the dissyllable of ruin really lightens that line and helps it move. If it was all spondies, I think, I'd want to throw even more things at Sir William Alexander than I already do.
We call that the dot matrix, because you start to rest, wealth, pride, war, like you just... Yeah. So you want to use it sparingly, but I think this is a good line for it.
It absolutely is. As you say, I think it is kind of the central tenet of the play, or the play in microcosm, if you had to sum it up in one line. Rest leads to wealth, wealth leads to pride, pride leads to war leads to the dark side. So now we get the entrance of Croesus in a quite woeful state. Lynsey, I very much hope you will. I hope you will be feeling appropriately woeful here. Whenever your woeful heart is ready.
Lo, I who late did thunder from a throne, am now a wretch whom every one disdains. My treasure, honour, state, and freedom gone. No kind of comfort, no, nor hope remains. And after me, let none whom greatness shrouds trust tumid titles, nor ostensive shows. Sails swollen with winds, while stimulating clouds, that which puffs up, oft at the last o'erthrows. Oh, had this precious wit enriched my mind, which by experience I have dearly bought, whilst fortune was within my court confined, and that I could not think a bitter thought. Then, satisfied with sovereignty erst proved, I had disdained new dangers to embrace, and clothed with majestic, admired and loved, had lived with pleasure and had died in peace. But what more wonderful in any state than power, when courted, that is free from pride? But chiefly those who live securely great they oft may err, since fortune is their guide. What could the world afford, or man effect, which did not smooth my soul whilst I was such? Whom now the changing world doth quite neglect, by prospering plagued, starved only with too much, long lulled asleep with scornful fortune lies, a slave to pleasure, drowned in base delights. I made a covenant with my wandering eyes, to entertain them still with pleasant sights. My heart enjoyed all that was wished of late, whilst at the height of happiness did cloy, still served with dainty but suspected meat. My soul with pleasure sick was faint for joy, all with much care what might procure mine ease, my will divined, obsequiously devised, and who my fancy any way could please, as praised by me, was by all others prized, save serving me none else could have deserved, of whom whatever came was held of weight. My words and looks were carefully observed, and whom I graced were had in honour straight. For pomp and power far passing other kings, whilst too secure with drowsy thoughts I slumbered, my coffers still were full of precious things, of which as weight least weighed, gold scarce was numbered. I reared rare buildings, all embossed with gold, made ponds for fishes, forests for wild beasts, and with vain thoughts which could not be controlled, oft spent the day in sport, the night in feasts. I tossed the elements with power like loves, drived water up, air down, a pleasant change. For stately fountains, artificial groves, as common things were not accounted strange. With me, what more could any monarch crave? In all the parts of pomp, none could compare. My minions gallant, counsellors were grave, my guards were strong, my concubines were fair. Yea, whilst high fortune my defects supplied, I had all that could breed, as now I find, in others wonder, and in the owner pride. So puffing up the flesh to spoil the mind, thus with delight, long pressing pleasure's grapes, with fortune I caroused what men dare hold. But from misery none always scapes. One must be wretched once, or young or old. Then weary to be well and tired of rest, to waken trouble, I the occasion sought, and yet to cloak the passions of my breast, did with devotion long cloud what I thought. Of all the oracles I did inquire what was to come of this intended war, who said, as seemed to second my desire, that I a mighty monarchy should mar, those doubtful words I wresting to my will, in hope to break the haughty Persian's powers, did ruin quite, whilst all succeeded ill, what many a age had gained, even in few hours. And this may be admired as more than strange. I who disdained an equal of before, what cannot fortune do when bent to change? Then servants less must dream content no more. What I not big with scorn my state surveys, whom all do pity now, or worse do blame, and bound even to my foe for some few days, which borrowed are with the interest of my fame. Though this sweet gale of life-bestowing winds would seem a favour, so it seems to some, who by the baseness of their muddy minds show from what vulgar stock their kind doth come. I scorn unlike myself thus to be seen, though to my comfort this appeared to tend, as if misfortunes past had only been a tragic entry to a common end. Of all that plague my state, what greater pest than servile life, which faints from the earth to part, and hath in one united all the rest, to make me die each day, yet live to smart. Life in my breast no comfort can infuse, an enemy's gift could never come for good. It but gives time of misery to muse, and bathe my sorrows in a bitter flood. Ah, had my breath straight vanished with my bliss, and closed the windows that gave light to life, I had not borne to misery submiss the height of those mishaps which now are rife. Whilst with 1,000 sighs I call to mind the death of Artis and mine own disgrace, in such an agony my soul I find, that life to death would willingly give place. But since I see reserved for further spite, I with sad thoughts must burden yet my soul, my memory to my distracted sprite of all my troubles shall present a scroll, of which, while as the accounts I go to cast, when numbering my misfortunes all of late, I will look back upon my pleasures past, and by them balance my now hapless state.
It's not a wonder thus to see how by experience each man reads in practice volumes penned by deeds. How things below inconstant be, yet whilst ourselves continue free, we ponder oft, but not apply that precious oil, which we might buy, best with the price of others' pains, which, as was not to us pertained, to use we will not condescend, as if we might the fates defy. Still, whilst untouched our state remains, but soon the heavens a change may send, no perfect bliss before the end. When first we fill with fruitful seed the apt conceiving womb of the earth, and seem to banish fear of dearth, with that which by time may breed, still do our hopes exceed. The frost may first with cold confound the tender greens which deck the ground, whose wrath through April's smiles assuage, it must abide the Aeolian rage, which to o'ercomed whilst we attend all Croesus' wandering tresses bound. The rains let from their cloudy cage may spoil what we expect to spend. No bliss before the end. Lo, whilst the vine tree grape with grapes, with nectar liquor strives to kiss embracing elms not loved amiss, whose clusters lose their comely shapes, whilst by the thunder burned in heaps, all Bacchus' hopes fall down and perish. Thus many things do fairly flourish, which no perfection can attain, and yet we worldlings are so vain, that our conceits to hide we bend, if fortune but our springtime cherish. Through divers storms we must sustain. To harvest ere our eyes ascend, no perfect bliss before the end. But all who in this world must have place, there is a course which must be run. And let none think that he hath won till he finished hath his race. The forest through the which we trace, the brood ravenous beasts, which do abhor us, and lie in wait still to devour us, whose brambles do our steps beguile, the fear of which through we exile, and to our mark with gladness tend, then balls of gold are laid before us, to entertain our thoughts a while, and our good meaning to suspend, no perfect bliss before the end. Behold now, Croesus, long lived, throughout this spacious world admired, and having all that he desired, 1,000 means of joy contrived, yet suddenly is now deprived of all that wealth, and strangely falls for everything his sprite appalls, his sons deceased, his country's loss, and his own state which storms do toss, thus he would not apprehend. Then whilst he slept in marble walls, no, nor imagery any cross, nor imagine any cross, to bear all those his beast must lend, his breast must lend, no perfect bliss before the end. And we, the Leanders, who designed to reign over all who were about us, behold how fortune too doth flout us, and utterly hath us resigned. For ourselves we that assigned a monarchy, but knew not how. Yet though we make the world to bow, which at our force stood afraid, we by whom the plots were laid, to think of bondage must descend, and bear the yoke of others now. Oh, it is true that Solon said, while as he doth breath extend, no man is blessed, behold the end.
It's cheerful.
Yeah. Pretty much a goth number there. And
I'm going to try and see if I can see you. I've just been reading the text on a blank screen.
Yes, please see
But
us.
if I jump out of hyperspace, then adieu.
So if I experiment with inserting stanza breaks and line breaks, if I hit return after every no perfect bliss before the end, what I come up with, and please check me on this because I could be wrong, is a 14-line stanza. So I come up with what, 5 or 6 of those? And you know, so sometimes inserting stanza breaks into one's text is sort of helps organize one's thoughts. So we get an A B B A C C D D E F E F F something like that, which is an insanely complicated stanza form. So, you know, props to Sir William, colonizer though he was. If you were wondering why Nova Scotia is named Nova Scotia, it means New Scotland, and it's this guy's fault, and or King James's fault. The ancestral territory, of course, of the Mi'kmaq people, who still experience oppression today, and it's this guy's fault. So, Lynsey, we got to see the fall of Croesus, the diametric opposite of Croesus's first speech, where he told everyone how happy he was. And he's not going to go quietly into that good night, is he?
No, and I just sort of, as I was reading it, I was thinking, is he has he been humbled? His state has been humbled. His estate has been humbled. But I'm not quite sure if he's had that inner revolution. At the end he says, I basically, what's happening to me now balances how things were before. But he's sort of saying, well, I don't really want to be alive, because if I died before, then I wouldn't have to experience the fact that my estate is now so humbled. So I'm not really, grateful for having been saved. And there's it was kind of, obviously I was just kind of sight reading it rather than trying to sort of thinking, what's he really saying? But I'm not quite sure he's quite had the, what is the word, Damascene moment.
Yes, I do like that there are so many shades in that speech, that it's not just woe is me, that there's anger, there's recrimination, there's even a little bit of defiance still, and there are all kinds of ways you could play that. Does the audience, are we intended to have some sympathy with Croesus at the last?
I don't know. What's been occurring to me during tonight's session is that this is almost like, we were talking in the chat about how it almost seems like the speeches are like arias. And I was thinking, yes, this is sort of like an exercise in reciting rhetorical, different verse forms. And, you could almost use it, as a competition piece, who's going to do this, who's going to win, who's going to do this better. And everybody has these great long speeches, nobody misses out. And there are some fantastic speeches. So, I'm not really sure it's been written with a sense of how the audience would respond. An audience would respond. I'm not getting a sense of an audience being part of the plan.
Yeah, I wonder. Anyone else have a sense of whether this play might be intended for an audience, and if so, what kind? Rachael.
Wasn't he like a courtier?
He was.
I feel that this was very much like, if this was performed for somebody, it was performed for the court. It was, we've said in the chat that it was published in 1604, and James the First and Sixth, I think he hops on that English throne in 1603.
He does.
This could be a cautious, a cautious, a tale of caution. There's that painting in Venice, I think, on the walls, or maybe not in Venice, but in some Italian city, called the Allegory of Good Government, and then there's the Allegory of Bad Government. And you could have this as some sort of play like that this is, something like that. And maybe that's also the reason that there's not a lot of Christian religion talked about, because he doesn't know which direction that James will go in, whether he'll return to Catholicism or remain Protestant. And also that opening we had on that first day is so in the face to the audience that it's kind of like everybody in the room would kind of maybe know what he was saying in that time, and it might really have worked well in this time. And we might just lose that now because we don't have that same thing. But if like an event happened, you know what I mean? Like this is now, it's not, what do you call it? You might need the right event to put this on the docket for a season for people to have that conversation again about.
Yeah, I mean, I can think of one or two. I can certainly think of one analog for Croesus, but it might be a bit of a cheap shot. And hey, these are going to be up on YouTube for way longer than anyone remembers him. What struck me about this is that unlike a lot of stage plays, there's no mention of the monarch at the end. There's no, and so we pray God to continue our benevolent ruler, Elizabeth and or James, in long life and health. Emily.
Well, I wonder if he could get away with not basically doing. All I can think now is Pirates of Penzance and ending with the Hail Victoria hymn. But I wonder if he could get away with that because, in fact, it was published. It very well may not have been performed, or if it's performed, it's being read in, perhaps other courtiers' households where they're all getting essentially the the message, and James can read it on his own and get the message pointed at him while someone else goes and runs off and hides in Nova Scotia. So which is to say, I don't know that he had to in the same way, since this would have been a private correspondence between the reader and the author. And the other thing too, though, I think fascinating because it ends with this whole act. Act 5, as you were saying, Lynsey, is like a series of arias, is a series of dramatic poems. And then, as you were saying, Liza, that it ends with possibly this ballad, this rondo. That is not me. That is all you smart people telling me what the form is, possibly in the chat.
Hey, we're all spitballing here.
That's right. But that it's ending with these series of sonnets with a repeated refrain, very nihilistic, very okay, all right. I do love that ending line. It's so modern in some ways to take the last line and switch it to from, let's see, what is it? No perfect bliss before the end is the repeated refrain. And then to end with no man is blessed, behold the end. And in our script, there's no sort of like blackout, end of play, fin, anything like that. And we're just left with all this white space on the page. So as a reader, I'm like, oh, it's the end. Oh my stars. It had an interesting feeling to me that sort of sums up the whole play, but reminds me that this is a play. This is a poetic play. This is definitely a closet drama. The middle section is a really good dramatist thing. And actually, Rachael, I don't know if you want to mention what your theory is that you've been putting in the chat about this being an evolutionary piece.
I would love to hear that.
No, I just think that this is I don't know, it's part of somebody's personal artistic evolution, because this guy is definitely a poet, I think, foremost. And he's writing in this that contrasting way that he's writing, even with the scenes contrasting one another, I think is very poetic. And that this is some move from poet, the identity of a poet, into the identity of a dramatist. And this is just the work that bridges the gap in between those two. For him personally, I think.
To me, that makes a lot of sense, because it was a lot more socially acceptable for a noble person to be a poet than to be a dramatist. Putting human passions on stage for base coin is a lot more acceptable if you pretend to be a poet rather than a playwright while you do it. And yeah, I mean, as people say, this reads like something that you could either only perform at court in front of an essentially captive audience, or it's the sort of thing people might have one copy of in a room and pass around and read aloud. The other place where you do see neoclassical drama, perhaps sometimes staged, is the Inns of Court. And if someone at Lincoln's Inn or someone had a copy of it, I could see some masochistic Inns of Court student going, "Oh, this is so great! Let's put it on!" And yeah, I mean, it's the sort of thing that could go on there. But yeah, I agree with you about that last chorus, that it feels very modern, but it also sort of feels like a poem that might have been written separately and might have been sort of sutured Frankenstein style onto the end of this play. Tom, how did you feel reading it?
Yeah, I thought it was a lovely summation of the whole thing. That what the fates had in store, and how the downfall and the moral in that tale. But as you say, I mean, it was just one or two lines that I could sort of like hold on to, and then try and generate up from that. It was quite nice. And again, one would love to read it a number of times and really sort of like do it justice. But again, it was a lovely rollicking tale that rolled along. But once again, my God, some of those speeches were long. It was like, I know the Olympics have just finished, but it felt like, hurdles.
Well, I guess this is partly. Sorry, were you? Had you done? I didn't mean to step on you.
Yes.
I mean, when you're a poet, you don't. If you think of yourself as a poet rather than a dramatist, you don't have to be constrained by what will work on stage, or what an audience will stand still for, or how much an actor can memorize. So this is, any of these speeches is an athletic accomplishment. Rachael, I wanted to applaud at the end of Nuntius, like that was an Olympic marathon that you ran. Lynsey, both Harpagus and Croesus. And it's just a question I guess of how, if one were ever to perform any of this, it's how many tone shifts, how much light and shade can you find in those speeches, But it does feel like speaking poetry rather than speaking drama, I think, partly because of the verse. And I'm talking more than a host should. Someone else talk. Emily!
I have to turn off my air conditioner so it doesn't get picked up. Okay. Yeah, but I do want to say dramatically, I haven't seen as often, and maybe those of you who've read more poetic plays, really written by poets rather than written by dramatists. I haven't seen the use essentially of an envoy, of a repeated line, that much in dramatic plays, and I love it because it is so inherently dramatic. Actually, there's a modern playwright who's working on a forget what he's called. I hope I could say it's but set now and in an old person's home. And I know, I'm really sorry, but I couldn't think of any other way to say it. Anyway, but what he's done is whenever they're alone and have a soliloquy, he uses certain poetic form, which continues to repeat lines. And it's really powerful. And I don't see that much because it creates a leitmotif. And it creates something that every time you say it, it has a different weight. It has a different meaning. So if dramatists are looking to borrow from poetry, I think this is something that we discovered in this text that I would love to see more of.
Yeah, I do like the repeated lines. The other thing it reminded me, apart from the French forms, was the Pearl stanza. Pearl being, for those listening who don't know what the Pearl we're talking about, an anonymous medieval poem, narrative poem, dream vision, about it narrated by a character who's bereaved, and they dream that they see their daughter, the pearl that they lost. And the Pearl stanza is a 12-line stanza where the first and last lines repeat in every section. So that's worth looking at. I mean, I would say just generally read Pearl. It's great. But it's great if you like medieval poetry, which, let's face it, we're a room full of nerds here. I do like that repeated text, and I think we've come across something similar maybe in one or two of the medieval dramas we've done. Possibly. I may be misremembering that. But in a play like this where you have a chorus, and the choruses are expected, I think the choruses get a little more license to be poetic than the character speeches. In some of the, I know in some of the dramas we've read, the chorus, I think it was in Tancred and Gismund, the chorus had a different verse form every time. And yes, I'm getting a divine inspiration that's reminding me that one of the plays in question was the medieval drama of Christ's Burial, where the Virgin Mary had a very long set-piece speech that involved some repeated lines, many different repeated lines, which gave it a sort of quasi-musical form in some ways. I'm talking a lot again. I'm going to go around the room for final thoughts, and the person I'm going to go to first is the person who's been here for all the sessions, which is the excellent and most amazing Rachael.
So I'll keep it short. This definitely needs to be cut down for performance. There's no question. These speeches are they're beautiful, but to be off book and do them as an actor, I think and for the audience's time, you need to just cut them. Like it would be painful, I think, off book. This play reminds me of Jocasta. It kind of ends on a similar note by our Gascoigne, our beloved Gascoigne. The repeated line in that final chorus, I wonder if you could play that final chorus as a song, and if perhaps there could have possibly been a musical accompaniment to that. A possible little swan song, even though he's still alive. And then how you just brought up its similarity to medieval poetry, that this even for a neoclassical style, that perhaps this is written even though I do think it's a poet going into a dramatist type thing, he could also just be writing in a very old style of drama from, the things that we saw like in the mystery cycle.
Yes, absolutely. And one of the reasons I was late coming in after that is that I was looking up the source of a recently published essay in Early Elizabethan Tragedy, the journal, that is in Early Theatre, on hidden music in Early Elizabethan Tragedy by Ross W. Duffin, scholar. And he specifically looks at the choruses in Gorboduc and thinks about how they would work musically and what tunes they might have used for them. And it's a really nice essay with a lot of sheet music. If you can read the Early Theatre Journal, if you have access, I would highly recommend it. It's interesting to see where music might be used in a potential staging of this or other neoclassical plays. Final thoughts. The flying fickle finger of fate lands next on Lynsey.
The finger got me. Yes, good. I don't know about cutting because I haven't been here for all of it. But I don't really see this as a work of drama or work of theatre. I see it as a work of kind of rhetorical, poetic, storytelling. And therefore, I think in terms of performance, for me, I would be inclined to have it be extremely stylized, disembodied heads, speaking, maybe quite a drone-like quality to it, to really, make the listener pay attention to the language in a different kind of way or something like that. I'd be tempted to sort of go in that direction with it, rather than thinking of it as a play in the way that we would normally think of it. I think it's got some great stuff in it. If I'd had a bit more time to prepare, I probably would have been able to look a bit more at the bits I was reading, and maybe look at where the punctuation was helping me, and where it was not just as sort of sight reading, and not being quite sure where to take a breath and that kind of thing. But that's it really. Cool.
Yeah, I do like your thought of, disembodied heads, maybe ambient soundscapes under the speeches, just put people in a bit of an altered state. And final thoughts from Tom?
Yeah, it was poetic, but it was as if he just threw everything at the page, and then you edit it again, to tighten it up, basically. But the actual material was lovely, and it had some power because of the words. Yeah, they did convey the. Again, I don't know the first two. I only came in on Act 4, but they did convey this fall from grace, this tragedy that, and not in a but in a very lovely way, in a way that it was like, this is what happens, and this has happened, and the consequences are that the city will be sacked, and virgins will be offered up for playthings, and there is no hiding place, and so. But I only think that slightly, the length of it slightly detracted from the poetry, and that was a pity, because there was some lovely stuff in there.
It's true. I mean, when you're the Earl of Stirling, maybe very few people offer to edit you. And Emily, final thoughts.
Sure. Yeah, no, I agree with sort of what everyone's been saying, that this is very poetic drama, but and I'm probably biased because I got to do Croesus in the last section, and the middle section is so dramatic. I do think this can be staged. I agree it needs to be massively cut, mostly so that the audience can hear the poetry. Because unlike reading, where you can stop and spend several minutes on a single line of verse, like walk away, take a shower, think about it, come back, read the next 2 lines, in a play there's a constant forward motion, and the audience is about 7 seconds behind. So anything that you want to really have heard, you need to not have too much stuff around. You need white space around it. So yeah, I would cut this down. Last time someone mentioned maybe doing like shadow puppets. I agree, doing some sort of spectacle, or doing it almost as a mask or a pageant when you have a longer piece, might be fascinating. I think the trickiest thing is going to be maintaining the rhyme and not losing, not suddenly having a moment of blank verse because you've cut it in such a way that you miss, you have A, or you have A, B, A, B, A, B, Q, like, so that'll be a little tricksy. But I would love, I think it'd be really interesting to have this staged honestly. And I agree that there's some glorious lines in there that I don't know that would fly by, and I would be like, oh my goodness, no, I feel like I want to stop and stay with this for a while. So I would recommend reading it as well to anyone who enjoyed this series.
You're right. You know, I mean, I think the general consensus is that this isn't wouldn't necessarily be stage worthy, or would have to be altered in some ways to make it stage worthy, or could be chopped and changed and put into some other form. But equally, as you say, I think it is meant to be spoken, and it might be meant to be heard. One thing we're learning about virtual theater is that on the internet, it's possible to stage the unstageable, because your audience don't have to sit still and be quiet in a dark room for 2.5 hours. They can get up and make dinner and do some sewing and, do other stuff while you're doing whatever strange thing you're doing for, 1,000,000 years, or however long the YouTube limit is. So plays like this could have another life virtually, or as audio dramas. Might be nice for maybe not long car rides, because there's a risk you might fall asleep, but ASMR or something. Anyway, this concludes the third and final section of our first look at Croesus by Sir William Alexander. I believe that there either are or will soon be other plays by Sir William Alexander available on our YouTube channel. And, of course, the Beyond Shakespeare podcast is also available at Audio Boom or wherever quality podcasts may be found. Rob, if you're going to kill me, please don't. All that remains for me is to thank our wonderful readers. If you don't see me again, just tell my family I died fighting zombies, and to say good night.